everybody. Thanks for joining us. I want to begin, as we always do, by acknowledging we're on Treaty 1 territory in the traditional homeland of the Métis. Thanks for joining us today. I'm joined by Jay Shaw, Assistant Chief, Emergency Management. I'll be making some opening comments, and we'll then turn it over to Jay. We'll provide you with a COVID update and both be available to answer your questions with respect to our COVID efforts, and then I'll also be available for topics after Jay has left on other topics that might be of interest to you. I want to begin by reminding all Winnipeggers that despite obviously the infection rates and numbers that we're hearing being reported, we need to continue to be vigilant with respect to sticking to those fundamentals, including, of course, washing hands, wearing a mask, and watching your distance. Just encourage everyone to continue to follow the recommendations from Manitoba Health as best you can to protect not only yourself and your loved ones, but also our community. As with previous changes to the provincial public health orders, the city is receiving the new information at the same time as the general public through the press conferences of provincial officials. We understand that the new orders were published about an hour ago. These orders are being reviewed to ensure that the letter and the spirit in which they're intended is understood, and as is often the case, we typically follow up with provincial officials just to ensure that our understanding and clarifications are addressed so that our public service can then implement them as it relates to city services in an appropriate manner. The public service is already hard at work to ensure the proper review is undertaken. And when we're in a position to resume services more fully, it's done so with the safety of our valued employees as well as our residents in mind. It's been pretty cold out lately. As we continue to see extreme cold weather across the prairies, including here in the city of Winnipeg, and that's expected throughout the weekend, I do want to provide you with a brief update. While we continue to hear from End Homelessness Winnipeg that there is shelter space available, we're still seeing unsheltered Winnipeggers in places like transit shelters that are simply not intended as temporary. They're not intended for purposes other than temporary reprieve from the elements. There has been dialogue between officials, between city and provincial officials for some time, and we have suggested that the provincial government utilize City of Winnipeg spaces as shelter solutions. On Tuesday, I wrote to the Premier of Manitoba to raise a few critical issues that need immediate attention, specifically options to stay warm during daytime hours and lower barrier options. City of Winnipeg doesn't have the staff as the province does with the appropriate skill set and qualifications to provide direct care, attention, and supervision to those who would utilize a shelter facility. We're still awaiting a response from the Premier. In the absence of immediate action from the provincial government in an area of their jurisdiction, the city is once again the last line of defense. Jay Shaw will provide some details shortly. However, the city is preparing to open a couple of temporary daytime warming spaces to serve that immediate need. It's not perfect, but the city is taking this step because action is needed. Lastly, I'd like to commend the public service for their work on two new options to safely make it down the riverbank onto the Winnipeg Foundation Centennial River Trail. City of Winnipeg has built two new portable access ramps that measure just over 30 meters long and more than a meter wide. One was installed on the northeast side of the Norwood Bridge near the Forks and connects to the Red River portion of the River Trail. The other connects to the Assiniboine River from the Hugo Street dock near Wellington Crescent. With those updates, I'll turn things over to Jay, and then we'll both be available to answer your questions with respect to COVID. Thanks. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon. My name is Jay Shaw. I'm the Assistant Chief of Emergency Management for the City of Winnipeg. I know residents are eager for an update regarding the reopening of city services such as libraries, public washrooms, pools, and recreation centres, as per the announcement earlier this week by the provincial government on a slight loosening of Code Red restrictions. The orders were just posted publicly about an hour ago, and we still require some time to go through them, determine what aspects of city services are impacted, and then make plans for how we can safely reopen services for our residents. I know everyone is eager to reopen services, but we need to ensure that we are doing so safely and as outlined in the health orders. We will not rush to reopen and risk putting the health and safety of our staff and residents at risk. I want to take this opportunity to thank our residents for their continued patience as we work through this process. But to be clear, they should not expect to see any city services restored this weekend. As the cold weather continues in our city, I want to ensure you that the City of Winnipeg is in regular contact with End Homelessness Winnipeg and sheltering partners through the Extreme Weather Committee to identify needs and to plan for supports to the community as required. We have received updates that shelters continue to have space overnight. However, we have heard that there is an urgent need for additional daytime and weekend warming space, particularly in the downtown and St. Boniface area. Beginning tomorrow, we will be opening space within the Millennium Library and St. Boniface Library to act as temporary daytime warming space. The Millennium Library will open as a temporary warming space daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. for the next couple of weeks, as is required by the weather. St. Boniface Library will be open as a temporary warming space tomorrow and Saturday, but closed on Sunday and Monday, and then it will reopen again daily beginning on Tuesday of next week. I want to be clear that these two facilities are not open to the public for library services, as we are still finalizing those plans, and the current structure of holds pickup and return is still in place for the public. Rather, these two facilities will be available for our residents who need a temporary spot to seek a reprieve from the cold. We will now take your questions from the media.
Joyanne from the Winnipeg Free Press.
Hi, so just following up on the warming hours there. I believe you said 10 a.m. and then I didn't catch the end on the Millennium Library, and I'm guessing that would be every day, as well as what are the exact hours for St. Boniface Library?
Yeah, Joanne, I'll just reread that part again. The Millennium Library will be open as a temporary warming space daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. for the next couple of weeks as required. And the St. Boniface Library will be open as a temporary warming space tomorrow and Saturday, but closed on Sunday and Monday, and then reopening daily beginning Tuesday.
What were the hours at St. Boniface, though? I didn't catch
Let me
that.
get back to you on that. I think it's 10 to 5 as well, but we'll get back to you just to confirm.
And what do you mean pending the need by the weather? What's I guess the minimum temperature you need to keep these open? So
we're in an extreme weather alert right now. Even when the extreme weather alert ends, we'll assess and take a look and see what the needs are. It doesn't need to be -10 or -5 to say that it's not cold. We're going to do what's needed for the next couple of weeks, and we'll assess. But we know that for sure the next week or so, February is always a really cold month. Let's get through the next couple of weeks and we'll assess and see where we need to go. So I want to be able to do this, to get out of the extreme weather warning that we have now, and then we'll assess and see what the needs are.
Ian from CBC.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
To go to that, I guess the city is not prepared at this point to reopen, I guess, some city services, at least by the weekend. That isn't stopping, a bunch of businesses who got warnings a few days ago, who would have seen, I guess, even a week prior the draft. I mean, what do you say to those people, to Winnipeggers that expect services to be ready when the city did receive, several days of heads up? Maybe not as detailed as they wanted, but still there was a heads up.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And the short and simple answer is that on occasion, when the public health orders by the province are released, municipalities have to take time to look at them and to get clarification from the province on how to operationalize a specific aspect of an order. And we also want to make sure that we're following the spirit of all the orders as well. So it does take time. This has been the process for the last several months as we've gone through openings and closings. And I recognize and I want to thank all of our residents for being patient. We have recalled some staff. We are looking to open things up as fast as possible, but we do need to review and we do need to get clarification on some of the process aspects of it. But it's a good question, and I thank all residents for their patience.
There's also a couple points I'll just make. In an ideal world, we'd be working more collaboratively with the provincial government, and they would share more proactively in advance of their announcements, so that when announcements are made by provincial health officials and provincial elected officials that impact city services, we'd be in a position to articulate how it will be implemented in a timely way. You know, as we've acknowledged many times, we do watch the press conferences, and what we ultimately need to see is the provincial public health orders, because those are that's obviously the legal documentation that we've got to be guided by. And we have had on occasion issues, whether it's essential services issue and others that I know have been canvassed extensively by the media. There are times when statements made don't necessarily reflect or may have a different interpretation when we actually see the orders. And then there's also the due diligence that has to occur to follow up with provincial officials to seek clarity on the letter and, as we've learned, the spirit of how they intend it to be implemented. And so we expect our public service to be able to do that due diligence, to talk to the provincial government officials on their provincial health orders, and to make sure that they're implemented in a safe way. And that's the process that we're following.
Jason, you did note about recalling city staff. Does that still need to happen more? Do more staff need to be hired back to reopen things? And sort of what timeline are we looking at here? Maybe not this weekend, but sometime next week?
Yeah, great question. So as you recall, we put a recall in to bring back some staff to be able to start working on more holds pickups for libraries. And yes, we've been talking with the province, and there has been some sort of draft acknowledgement of potential options for health orders. So we were aware that shopping malls and restaurants and different things could open. But in terms of our specific city services and how they affect us, you are correct. We will have to go back, assess, take a look at those orders, make some operational decisions, and then what has to happen is that we have to make sure that the right staff are in place at the right locations, are trained appropriately with any new safety and COVID protocols, and then we can get those services operationalized. We have to follow the letter of the law on the public health orders, and we want to make sure that we're doing that well. So again, and I recognize that people want things open immediately. We're going to do it as fast as possible.
James from the Winnipeg Sun.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great.
Hey, James.
Hello. I'm just wondering, what is the level or quality of communication between the city and the province right now in terms of the deployment of vaccines? I'm just thinking specifically about folks like transit drivers and others on the front line.
I think last we spoke about this topic, we had some good dialogue with the province and with a couple of their physicians and public health leaders, and we are still advocating and working every single day to make sure that we can try and get vaccine to our critical services staff, like bus drivers, bus operators, and our firefighters, paramedics, and police officers. So still happening. You know what? James, if there was enough vaccines for everyone right now, this would be easy, wouldn't it? But it's not, and I know it's complicated. We'll keep advocating because it's important for our staff, because they are part of the solution to fight COVID. So,
thank you.
Joyanne from the Free Press.
Hi, I'm just wondering, with the pandemic still going, is there a capacity limit on the 2 warming spaces, the libraries that you mentioned, that you would have to operate under as a warming space?
Yeah, great question. So we're working on that right now in terms of all the safety and policy and procedures. We've been working on that for a little while just to make sure that we get that right. You got to have your 6 feet of separation. You got to make sure you're taking care of people while you open up that space. So We are going to be following proper safety and occupational health and safety rules and doing our best to be able to provide a safe space during the day, which is what our stakeholders at End Homeless Winnipeg and others have said. There is still additional need during the day and on weekends. So we're going to do our best to try and step up there and see what we can do to fill a little bit of that hole. So.
The other thing, Joyanne, is I mean these are last line of defense measures by the level of government that is not the primary level of government that is responsible for housing, mental health, addictions, some of the acute issues that a number of our residents face. In terms of the long term, that's why the Rapid Housing Initiative funding from the federal government and some of the other initiatives have been so important. But it's the reason why our officials have been in dialogue with provincial counterparts to highlight the fact that we do have additional facilities that currently are closed that could be utilized by provincial officials that have the appropriate level of training and qualifications to provide that assistance. It's why I wrote to the Premier on Tuesday of this week asking for an urgent meeting to discuss how we could work together to be part of the solution. We have the spaces, they've got the jurisdiction and the staff to help, and I'm still waiting for a response.
And so what exactly are you wanting them to fund? Staff at additional city facilities so that they can also be warming spaces? Is that what you're asking the province for?
Well, we're not asking them for funding. We're just saying what we have is we have facilities right now, and that's something that we can offer to the level of government that's responsible for housing, social services, mental health, addictions, that have the staff on hand within the provincial government's capacity to provide wraparound services where needed. And so they do have the staff, they do have the jurisdiction. What we do have right now is we have facilities, and so we have reached out proactively to offer those spaces should provincial officials be available to provide assistance to Manitobans who reside in the city of Winnipeg for those shelter spaces.
Ian from CBC.
Yeah, for these warming centers, is there an estimate in terms of A, how much this is going to cost, and B, what sort of staff are going to work in these facilities?
Yeah, great question. So costing, I don't have a number for you right now. There will be some costing for this for sure. We'll look to sort of calculate and add all that up. Basically, what's going to happen with these warming spaces is we'll be using some library staff and security as well, and working towards and to be able to provide those services. So there'll be a washroom, there'll be appropriate spaced chairs, potentially tables, and we're looking at what other services we may be able to provide in terms of hot beverages, water, things along that nature. But we're just coming together with this sort of right now, and we're going to have her open tomorrow and this weekend, and we're going to do our best to make sure that we're part of the solution here. So, and then we'll adapt and we'll evaluate at the end of day one and see what we need to do to, safety and wellness is going to be my #1 priority when I'm working with our city staff that are helping with this. So we want to take care of people.
Could there be a role for the city in overnight or weekend stays?
Not this weekend. I would never say never, but right now there's no city-run or city-operated overnight space. We work in dialogue with End Homeless Winnipeg and all of our partners. We have good conversations with them on a daily basis. If there are continuity issues or there's issues where they need to be addressed, they reach out. Right now, what they've asked for is additional space during the day and on weekends.
Did you
Okay.
have any further questions on this topic?
Yeah, sorry, were you saying it's not on weekends? I think that question was two-parter. Is this happening on weekends or no? Sorry.
Yes, yes. I misspoke if I said otherwise. It is open on the weekends, correct?
It is open on the weekends after
Correct.
this weekend. Okay, okay. And then as far as, you said there's no other city facilities reopening at this point because you're still assessing. I guess I just have one more question, just on the warming. I wasn't really clear on what exactly we're asking the province for. Like, we're asking them for staff so that we can add, like, what, rec facilities, or what exactly are you looking for them to do?
Well, there's been dialogue between our officials for some time, Joyanne, on the issue of shelter solutions. As I mentioned, I wrote to the Premier earlier this week to raise a few critical issues that, in my view, need immediate attention, specifically options to stay warm during daytime hours and lower barrier options. So, daytime hours, for example, is where we have spaces, and we know that the province has staff and obviously jurisdictional responsibility for these areas, and we want to work with them to really provide some additional warming spaces during the day for our residents, and that's something that we can work on with the province. In the meantime, where we can open some spaces as temporary reprieve from the elements, we're doing that right now, and those are the two that we're announcing today.
Okay, so you're trying to get them to provide, what, healthcare staff for additional ones, or?
Yeah, if you're going to operate a shelter, I mean, you obviously need staff that can safely provide those services. The province is the level of government that has healthcare workers. They have social workers. The whole gambit of wraparound services that would be needed for something more robust than we're announcing today with two libraries that would be utilized in the short term. The one thing we do have as a municipal government right now, especially with the closures, is we have facilities. So we're trying to work collaboratively with the provincial government to say, we've got facilities, you've got staff, and of course this is an area of provincial jurisdiction, but we think that we can lend a hand to your efforts. And so, with the resources we have, we're trying to offer some assistance to the provincial government to help them with an area within their jurisdiction.
Okay.
Ian, did you have any further questions on this topic?
No.
Joyanne, are you good?
Yes.
Okay, we will just, we'll let Jay escape and we'll do a
Okay.
switch over.
Thanks, Jay. So I'll just offer some comments about some of the federal funding that was announced yesterday, and then open it up to questions on that or other topics. Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, everybody. So after years of advocacy, I'm very pleased to see the federal government's landmark announcement yesterday of $14.9 billion in funding for public transit beginning in 2026-27. Public transit, as you know, is a crucial service in modern cities, and the City of Winnipeg welcomes having a strong government partner at the federal level who supports transit. Winnipeg Transit's been the city service hardest hit by the pandemic, so it's reassuring to know there'll be added funding available in the future. And I look forward to gaining additional details in how this funding program could be utilized by the City of Winnipeg. In the meantime, we're going to continue to work with our government partners on the existing $203.61 million earmarked specifically for Winnipeg Transit in the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Public Transit Infrastructure Stream, which, if approved by Council, will soon see projects prioritized from the Transit Master Plan, including zero-emission buses. I'm grateful to the federal government for supporting cities across Canada. I'm going to talk briefly about the current ISIP application that Council has already prioritized. Federal government's funding announcement, it's especially timely given the provincial government's recent dialogue that indicates their desire to redirect the remaining public transit infrastructure stream funding earmarked for Winnipeg by the federal government for distribution outside of Winnipeg. It's one thing for the provincial government to unilaterally end the 50-50 transit cost-sharing agreement that removed dedicated transit funding from the provincial government. It's another thing that the provincial government refused to cost match the federal restart funds for COVID-19 and public transit, as did other provincial governments, including the Conservative governments of Alberta and Ontario. But for the provincial government to now be attempting to redirect funds intended specifically for Winnipeg so that they can distribute to ridings outside of Winnipeg is frankly offensive. I'm not sure what this provincial government has against public transit, but it'd be great to have their support, like in other provinces, for a mode of transportation that's better for the environment and depended on in a city where most Manitobans live. It's on that basis I've written another letter to the Ministers of Municipal Relations and Central Services regarding the status of the city's current ISIP application that includes a new recreation campus in South Winnipeg, an expansion to the St. James Civic Centre, and the most significant projects being Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the upgrades to the North End Water Pollution Control Centre. In previous correspondence asking for the status of the city's ISIP requests, the provincial government indicated that they were, and I quote, bound by the provisions of the ISIP agreement that preclude them from disclosing the current status of Winnipeg's ISIP application with the federal government. However, the provincial Minister of Finance provided a recent update published in a local newspaper discussing the status of one of the city's priority ISIP projects with the federal government, the St. James Civic Centre, a project which I support. Since there was no issue for the minister of their government to communicate publicly on this, I've again requested confirmation from the province on the current status of the remaining projects in the city's ISIP application, specifically Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the upgrades to the North End Water Pollution Control Centre. With that, I'm available to answer your questions on that or other topics.
Joanne and Ian, since it's just the two of you, we'll go open scrum format, so ask away.
Sorry, did something actually happen on the transit transfer there, or are we at the same place as when that letter went out and the province had been seeking to move it over?
They have recently corresponded with us. They are attempting to redirect the funds, that the remaining now depleted funds that are in the federal government's transit stream allocation that is earmarked for Winnipeg Transit. They have written to us to indicate they intend to redirect those funds, and that's their desire. And so, you know, if the Premier, if there were funds that were dedicated to Manitoba, I'll just be candid here. If there were funds dedicated for Manitoba, and there was an attempt by anyone to redirect them to another province, our Premier would be quite vocal in trying to protect those funds for the province of Manitoba, and I'd support him. This is no different. The City of Winnipeg has funding that is intended to flow for Winnipeg Transit, over $200 million, and the provincial government is trying to redirect those funds, you know, away from public transit, and so it's very concerning. And Joanne, to answer your question, recent correspondence from the provincial government has once again indicated that they would like to redirect those funds.
Okay, so but they did say that before, so this is just kind of confirming that. They're not saying the feds have approved this or anything like that.
Well, on
there's
the
no new.
So there's the current ISIP application, which has 4 projects. That's the Winnipeg South, St. James Civic Centre, and Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the North End Sewage Treatment Plant. That's the one we're just trying to get clarity from the province on what have you applied for. And they're saying they can't let us know. Meanwhile, we see the Minister of Finance talking about a project in his constituency, which I support, but not indicating whether the North End Sewage Treatment Plant has been applied for at the federal level. There is another ISIP transit stream, which, as you'll know, has been sitting there waiting, and we've indicated for some time to both provincial and federal governments that It's my hope that we will, in fact, apply for those funds when the transit master plan is approved by council, and we'll need funding to implement it. So that fund was depleted by, I think it was about $248 million. The provincial government asked us to redirect it to the North End Sewage Treatment Plant. Difficult decision. We agreed to that. But we indicated right then that we wanted their commitment to protect the remaining depleted funds of over $200 million, so that when the master transit plan is released and approved by council, we've got some funds to actually implement it in a meaningful way. And what they're indicating to us, even in advance of council's request, they're saying we would like you to redirect them and agree to direct them outside of Winnipeg, which is absurd. The federal government has earmarked those funds specifically for Winnipeg Transit. They should be used for Winnipeg Transit. When you have another level of government trying to block the flow of funds in that manner and redirect them outside the city of Winnipeg, I mean, it's something. It just takes, what they've done to transit and what their position on transit in terms of funding. I mean, it's one thing to end the 50-50 transit cost sharing. It's another to not match the federal funding, restart funds for transit. But this is on another level we haven't seen.
How recent is this correspondence from the province?
I believe the most recent one was over the last week. So I've written back to the two ministers, specifically wanting to get clarity from them on and so I'll shift you back to the current ISIP application that's in. North End Sewage Treatment Plant's #1 infrastructure project that council has been leading on and pushing to get funding from other levels of government. We can't even get a commitment or an indication from the provincial government whether they've even forwarded that application to the federal government. And they've said the agreement precludes them from letting us know. But in the meantime, we have the finance minister publishing in the newspaper that they've applied for one of the 4 council projects in that ISIP application. And it's a good project. It's one that I support. But and I know it's in an area of the city that's important to the finance minister, but the North End Sewage Treatment Plant is a project that benefits the city and the capital region. And I think if they can publish in the newspaper that they've applied for one of the 4, they can certainly let us know and let Winnipeggers know they've applied for the North End Sewage Treatment Plant in a manner that was requested by council, Phase 1 and Phase 2.
And just on a point of clarity, the correspondence that you got over the last week was saying, was that redirection of that funds away from Winnipeg?
There were two things. One, we can't tell you whether we've applied and forwarded your application to the federal government. And then, of course, we see after receiving that letter, the Minister of Finance openly publishing in a newspaper that they've applied for one of the 4. Also indicating once again to us that they would like to redirect the transit funds that are earmarked by the federal government for Winnipeg Transit to projects outside the city of Winnipeg. And again, I just ask you, I mean, if that was happening to the province of Manitoba, you would expect, and I would actually support the Premier getting his elbows up and saying, I'm going to fight for funds that are earmarked for the province of Manitoba to protect, services and our residents. This is no different. These funds are directed at Winnipeg Transit. They're significant. They're going to help us implement the master transit plan when it's approved by council. To talk about redirecting it out, it's offensive.
Jim Bell is out as the head of Siloam Mission. Your reaction to that news?
Well, I did have a conversation with the new chair of their board, and I want to thank Garth for the outreach. Obviously, I'm appreciative of the fact that they appear to be rolling out a robust action plan to really help with some of the reconciliation efforts. I know there were some other changes at the board and staffing level that they indicated as well. And I hope that the changes that they're making, I'm sure that these were not easy decisions to make, but I want to thank them for really mapping out publicly the steps that they're going to be taking to better address some of the criticisms that they faced in terms of inclusion and reconciliation. And you know, I very much hope that they're successful, because they do provide services to many of our residents, and appreciate the fact that that they've addressed matters in as public a way as they've done today, to talk about how they're planning to move forward. And so you know, we're making efforts at the City of Winnipeg on this journey of reconciliation that we're on. And, you know, we're keeping open minds and open hearts to how we can continue to do better as a municipal government. And I think all organizations have a role to play as a signatory to Winnipeg's Indigenous Accord. I appreciate the fact that they've referenced that today, and they are challenging themselves to live up to the commitments that they've made by signing on to the Indigenous Accord. And I'll take this opportunity to encourage all organizations in the City of Winnipeg to join the Winnipeg Indigenous Accord as one measure that organizations can take to you know, compel further action.
Did there need to be a change at the top of Shalom Mission to
You know what,
facilitate?
I actually don't have the details of the staffing, so it's really not something I'm able to comment on. I'll tell you, my personal interactions with Jim over the years have always been very positive, but I obviously I can't speak to specific staffing issues within an organization. I'm not privy to you know, some of the details that have gone on within the organization, but I am pleased to see the action plan that they've mapped out. I think is ambitious, and obviously want to wish them well.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Not for me. Thanks.
I'm also good. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon. Okay, have a good afternoon, guys. Nice to see you. How are you?